So good evening again, class. So this is our chapter 2 for international business. So we will tackle here the national differences in political economy. So first, let's define what is a political economy. Political economy of a nation refers to how the political, economic, and legal systems of country are interdependent. So when we say political, economic, and legal system, it is part of the macro environment factors of our country, which means hindi siya uh, hindi siya nakokontrol. It's not controllable. The variables are not controllable, meaning you cannot stop this to happen. Okay? So they interact and influence each other, and they affect the level of economic well-being in the nation. Next slide. So what is a political system? Political system refers to the system of a government in a nation. So here in the Philippines, the political system of our country is democratic. So it is assessed according to the degree to which the country emphasizes collectivism as opposed to individualism. The degree to which the country is democratic or totalitarian. So here in the Philippines kasi, we are very united, di ba? And it emphasizes really the collectivism among us. So which means a lot of us are in favor for democracy. That's why our political system is democratic. So in collectivism, it stresses the primary of collective goals over individual goals. So it can be traced to the Greek philosopher Plato on 427 to 347 BC. So if you have some collective goals over individual goals, you practice collectivism. So today, collectivism is equated with socialist. So socialist came from Karl Marx, which from 1818 to 1883. It advocates state ownership of the basic means of production, distribution, and exchange. And it also managed to benefit society as a whole rather than individual capitalists. So how does modern day socialism look like? So in the early 20th century, socialism split into two. Number one is communism. Socialism can only be achieved through violent revolution and totalitarian dictatorship. So what we have on the early 20th century is by the retreat worldwide by mid-1990s. So ito daw yun, communism. So pag communication, it involves violent revolution. Talagang there is blood when there is a communist. And number two, we have social democrats. So socialism is achieved through democratic means. Example, retreating as many countries move toward free market economies and state-owned enterprises have been privatized. So it's really important that you know what is socialism and how can you differentiate it with communism. So now let's tackle about individualism. So etong mga to guys, I know it's very layman's term, 'di ba? Nagdadagdag lang tayo ng ism sa dulo. Because ism, it means philosophy. So individualism is the philosophy that individual should have freedom in his own economic and political pursuits. So each one of us have different opinions, diba? We have individualism among each of us, and it can be traced to Greek philosopher Aristotle in 384 to 322 BC, who argued that individual diversity and private ownerships are desirable. So in a company, actually, it is very evident that when you practice individuality and diversity, a good globalization of market happens because uh, you have different idealism, different opinions, skills, culture, and you combine it to one another to make it work. So that's very desirable because nagko-contribute siya sa success ng isang company. So number two is individually economic and political freedoms are the ground rules on which a society should be based. So syempre, we have society, di ba? Society, it's a group. It's a place wherein lahat kayo is nagkakasama, nagkakaintindihan. So here in individual economic and political freedoms, dapat ito din yung mga ground rules, which means kung sino-sino yung magkakamatch na ideology, sila yung nagkakaroon ng isang magandang society. So it implies democratic political systems and free market economies as well. So let's define what is democracy. So democracy refers to a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. So here in the Philippines, we know that we are part of the democracy system, which is we elected President Rodrigo Duterte as our president. So it's usually associated with individualism because we have a common goal, diba? And that pure democracy is based on the belief that the citizen should be directly involved in decision making. So, ito din yung part ng democracy which is important, that the mass or the people should be involved in decision making. Hindi lang yung mga nakakataas sa lipunan. But sometimes it can be disadvantage if half of the population is not educated, meaning their decision is not good. So let us educate one another, diba, to have a very good presidential candidate in year 2022. So most modern democratic states practice representative democracy where citizens periodically elect individuals to represent them. So by the book, by the law, we have individuals that needs to represent them, but we know that we have in the Church of Christ, we practice unity. So it is also associated with individualism because we act as one. And next is the totalitarianism. It is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life and prohibits opposing political parties. So, ito talaga yung extreme na political parties that should have a control over spheres of human life. Like, bawat galaw, kailangan kontrolado. Yun. So, number one is the communist totalitarianism. So found in states where the Communist Party monopolizes power. So sometimes sa other countries kasi, they believe that if their leader is able to control fully or monopolize the power, the country makes it more powerful. So nagiging mas powerful yung country kasi yun yung paniniwala nila. So number two, we have also theocratic totalitarianism, which is found in states as well, where political power is monopolized by a party, group, or individual that governs according to religious principles. And number three, we have tribal totalitarianism, which is a political party that represents the interests of a particular tribe to monopolize the power. So parang ano lang siya, it's very self-explanatory because communist refers to the Communist Party, theocratic refers to the group or party which includes governs according to the religious principles, and the tribal refers to the particular tribe that monopolizes the power, while the right-wing totalitarianism is the individual economic freedom that restricts individual political freedom. So we need to tackle also the importance of an economic system. So there are three types of economic systems. Number one is market economies. So here in our slide, it is mentioned that lahat ng productive activities ng privately owned production is dinedetermine ng supply and demand. So you know how supply and demand works, right? So if the supply is high, the demand is low. So inversely proportional po siya. And if the demand is high, the supply is low. So why? Siyempre hindi ka naman maghahanap kung nandyan, di ba? So lagi nating hinahanap yung wala eh. Yun talaga yung, ayun. Yung kung ano yung hinahanap natin, yun yung wala. So parang it's inversely, kabaliktaran siya. Kasi when there is an interaction between supply and demand, eto rin yan. Kapag masyadong marami yung supply, nagsasawa yung tao. 'Di ba? And pag nagsawa siya, syempre, pinapamigay na lang for free minsan yung mga bagay-bagay sa mundong ito. 'Di ba? Or kaya mga products or service. Or di kaya, wala na masyadong bibili kasi nga, masyado nang madami yung supply. And then, if nakakita ka naman ng magandang target na ibenta, okay? So, in demand talaga. So, maraming naghahanap and yung supply mo mababa, that's the time na pwede ka mag-increase ng price. So, when it comes to government, they encourage free and fair competition between private producers. Number two, the command economies. So, when we say command economies, it is the government plans the goods and services that a country produces, the quantity that is produced, and the prices as which they are sold. So they are very specific on the quantity and the price as well. So from the word itself, command, 'di ba? There is a regulatory body. Sabi dito, all businesses are state-owned and governments allocate resources for the good of society. Ang tanging regulatory body nila is government. So lahat ng business, pagmamayari ng government, can you imagine that? And because there is a little incentive to control the cost and be efficient, command economies tend to stagnate. So that's the disadvantage of the command economies. So in mixed economies, okay, certain sector of economy are left to private ownership and free market mechanisms while other sectors have significant state ownership and government planning. So, ato naman hati, market and command economy. So here, the government tends to own the firms that are considered important to national security. So ano ba yung mga important sa firm? Parang dito sa Philippines, it's a mixed economy. Lalong-lalo na before. Because before Meralco is part of our government, no? Nire-regulate siya ng gobyerno. So, what do you think is the best economic system? So, depende rin yan sa culture, 'di ba? Sabi ko nga sa country. So, when you have a meeting 5 to 10 years from now with other participants from other nations, you will understand that. So, next is the legal system. So, the legal system of a country refers to the rules that regulate behavior along with the process by which the laws are enforced and through which redress for grievance is obtained. So, meron tayong tinatawag na legal system. Ito yung batas na tinatawag. Meron tayong common law, which is based on tradition, precedent, and custom. Meron tayong civic law, which is based on the laws organized into codes. And we have also theocratic law, which is based on religious teachings. So, ito yung mga batas na kinocompose na ating legal system. The common law, the civic law, and the theocratic law. And how are the contracts enforced in different legal system? So, We know that a contract is a document that specifies the condition under which an exchange is to occur and the details of the rights and obligation of the party involved. Siyempre sa the contract, you specify the date, di ba? And the occurrence of the obligations as well as yung mga for example, hindi mo nabayaran, mga penalties, mga charges, di ba? Na nagda-direct doon. Or kaya discount if ever man nag-advance ng payment. So, kailangan yung mga certain conditions na yan, madraft mo into contract. So, why contract is very important? Contract law is the body of law that governs contract enforcement. So under a common law system, contracts tend to be very detailed with all contingencies spelled out. So kailangan naka-written siya, document, hindi lang basta sinabi. So under a civil law system, excuse me, contracts tend to be much shorter and less specific because many issues are already covered in the civil code. So ito naman yung mga mga debates under that. And then many countries have ratified the United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, which establishes a uniform set of rules governing certain aspects of the making and performance of everyday commercial contracts between buyers and sellers who have their places of business in different nations. So meron din tayong contracts under that, no? If you have business in different nations, so you should have take a look on the UN Convention on Contracts for International Sale of Goods. Kasi kahit saan magpunta ka na country, uniform and standard yung rules na i-apply mo dun sa iyong business. Okay. Next is, how are property rights and corruption related? So, eto na. Dito na tayo sa mga unethical ways. Yan, corruption. Property rights. It referred to the legal rights over the use to which a resource is put and over the use made of any income that may be derived from that resource. So, ito yung legal rights mo eh. Ibig sabihin, meron kang karapatan, okay, dun sa pagmamayari mo. Dahil, kapag pagmamayari mo yan, dahil nilagay mo dyan yung iyong pawis, dugo, 'di ba? At nag-effort ka diyan para makuha mo 'yan. So ano ba 'yun? Napambili mo, 'di ba? Kasi nagkaroon ka ng income and then nagkaroon ka ng isang property. So it can also be violated through number 1, private action, theft, piracy, blackmail. Ayan, kung na-acquire mo yung mga property na yan through theft, piracy at saka blackmail, hindi yan pwede. Okay? Number 2, public action. Legally. Ayan. Excuse me. Excessive taxation or illegally bribes or blackmailing. Legally nga. Okay? Hindi mo nga ninakaw. Pero sobra-sobra ka naman mag-tax. Okay? Or kaya, legally nga, may dokumento nga, pero galing pala sa bribes or pampa-blackmail. So, hindi rin siya pwede. Ayan ay example ng corruption. Okay? That reduce the foreign direct investment. So, alam nyo na, yung mga masasamang gawain, meron syempre kaakibat yan ng mga disadvantage. Syempre, kapag mas mataas yung level ng corruption, nakaka-reduce siya, nakakawala siya ng trust, 'di ba, ng mga foreign direct investment. And level of international trade. Kasi syempre, kung papasok sila dito sa bansa natin, or for example, kahit sa ang bansa, and mataas ang level ng corruption, matatakot na sila, 'di ba, na mag-business dito. Kasi mas mahal pa ata yung babayaran nila sa bribery, okay? Or kaya naman tatakutin sila or iba-blackmail sila. So, meron ding batas under that. Ito yung Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which makes it illegal for US companies to bribe foreign government officials to obtain or maintain business over which that foreign official has authority. So, meron yun sa US. Ito yung batas nila. Na bawal talaga ang bribery. or pampa-blackmail para para ma-obtain or ma-maintain yung business ng isang company. So tingnan natin pero ito hindi to updated. Ito yung galing sa book nyo. So yung mga yung mga updated na current graphs, ayan, i-reveal ko siya on our next meeting. So by the book, ayan, ang corrupted daw na country is si Finland. Pero 2008 pa kasi yan eh. Check natin next week. So more on tayo, more on graph, more on current events tayo next week. So yan, meron New Zealand, United Kingdom, Japan. Ayan, wala namang Philippines. So baka sa next topic natin is nandun na siya sa updated one. So how can intellectual property be protected? So ang pinag-uusapan naman natin dito, class, is intellectual property kasi napag-usapan natin yung property rights, yung karapatan mo. So you can protect it, okay, using the following. Number 1, patents. So patents are exclusive rights for a defined period to manufacture, use, or sale of that invention. So kapag nilagyan mo ng patent yung isang intellectual property, pwede siya for sale. Ayan. Pwede rin siya for use. Pwede rin siya for manufacture. Kadalasan ginagamit yung patents sa mga unique business ideas. So if you watch Shark Tank, ayan, pinag-uusapan nila yung mga patents doon. So it's a business series wherein small businesses ay nagpipitch sa mga sharks, yung mga investors para makakuha. Okay? Siyempre, ng mga partners nila sa business. And siyempre, ito yung tinatanong ng mga sharks doon or mga investors. May patent na ba ang iyong business? Kasi kung wala, 'di ba? Subject siya to imitation eh. Ayun eh, yung lahat ng business plan nila. So, mawawala ng saysay if magkakaroon ng additional business idea yung ibang mga sharks din na pwede naman palang gumawa rin sila ng sarili nila, 'di ba? So etong patents, very exclusive rights lang to. So kung may mga ideas or mga invention na na-invent na, hindi mo na siya pwedeng i-reproduce. So ganun na poprotektahan ng patent ang isang product or service. Number 2 is copyrights. So we know the exclusive legal rights of authors, composers, playwrights, artists, publisher to publish and disperse their work as they see fit. So copyrights is madalas siya nakikita sa mga documents, ayan, sa arts, ayan, sa mga script, ayan, playwright, songs, ayan, sa YouTube, makikita nyo rin yan if mag-upload kayo ng video tapos kumuha kayo ng music na may copyright. So, ayan. Number 3 is trademark. Ayan. Design and names by which merchants or manufacturers designate and differentiate their products. Itong trademarks, ito yung mga logo. Actually, yung color din. It's very important din na ma-trademark siya sa logo. And then yung mga symbols, yung mga names. Ayan. Pero may mga bayad yan. Hindi yan free ha. So, ayan. So, medyo mahal naman siya. Pero kasi, long term yan. So, under siya ng ng mga assets na sobrang tagal. So, how can intellectual properties be protected? So, in protection of intellectual property rights differs from country to country. Dahil nga may globalization tayo.
Here's a reminder. Please drink water.
Okay, iinom ako. Ayan, pinapainom na ako ng tubig. So, how can intellectual property be protected? Number 1 is through World Intellectual Property Organization and the Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property. So to avoid piracy, ito yung mga kailangan yung gawin, guys. Stay away from countries where intellectual property laws are lax. Saan kaya? Ayan. File lawsuits. Ayan. And lobby governments for international property rights agreement and enforcement. So what is product safety and liability? So here we will discuss also about product safety laws, which is set certain standards to which a product must adhere. So we have also the product liability, which involves holding a firm and its officers responsible when a product causes injury, death, or damage. Usually mga batas to guys, when it comes to product safety, mahigpit talaga ang government. Kasi 'di ba, bago gamitin yan ng tao, dumaan yan sa masusing quality control. Kaya dapat kung meron kayong mga item diyan na sira or hindi safe gamitin, pwede kayong magreklamo, okay, sa mga hotlines nila. Hindi naman siya, pero galingan nyo naman yung pag-explain, wag niyong awahin. So, I have this one encounter, no, parang hindi ko na sasabihin kung anong brand. Basta sira siya or panis or something, ganun. So, ang ginawa ko, nag-email ako sa kanilang email or dati email. Pero ngayon, pwede nyo nang kaya kontakan yung mga social media platforms sila. Yun, mabilis lang yun. And ayun, sabihin nyo lang na may problema dun sa product, may damage or something. Sometimes they do refunds. Ayan. Hindi lang refunds. Yan. Papadalhan pa nila kayo ng mga products, okay? Na mas higit pa dun sa binili nyo. So kung multinational company ang nakasira niya na, pero kung mga SMEs lang, wag na kayong maghintay na palitan 'yan. Baka ayun or mga online selling. Kaya mas okay pa rin talaga bumili sa mga multinational company kasi strict ang law nila when it comes to product safety. So in a firm's home country than in a foreign, when product safety law are stricter in a firm's home country than in a foreign country, and when liability laws are more lax, the firm has to decide whether to adhere to home country or host country standards. So yun, mamimili na lang sila, yung business, kung anong gusto nilang i-adhere na policy. Kung yung host country or home country standards. So this slide pertains to what determines a country's level of economic development. So there are two ways to measure the levels of economic development. Number one is to gross national income per person, and number two is purchasing power parity, which is PPP. Here in the Philippines, we use GNP and GDP for measuring the levels of our economic development. So Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen argues economic development should be seen as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people experience. So, ano bang gusto niyang mangyari? Number one, gusto niyang mangyari is removal of major impediments to freedom like poverty, tyranny, and neglect of public facilities. Gusto ko rin itong mangyari, pero kulang, 'di ba? Kulang pa. So, ito dapat yung ideal setup ng economic development na dapat mo nang inuuna. Okay? And the number two is presence of basic healthcare and basic education. So, ito talaga, okay, pero hindi natin yun masasolve eh. Di ba mag-isa? So, kailangan tulong-tulong tayo. Poverty, public facilities, basic healthcare, basic education, kulang. Okay? Kulang dito sa bansa. So, what determines a country's level of economic development? So, according to the United Nations, guys, it is use of sense ideas to develop the Human Development Index, which is what we call the HDI. So, ang ibig sabihin nito, it is based on the life expectancy at birth, educational attainment, and whether average incomes are sufficient to meet the basic needs of life in a country. So, ito yung mga variable na hinahanap. Life expectancy at birth. So, according to the insurance research, meron lang daw tayong 28,000 days to live. So, if you convert it into years, meron lang tayong 70 plus, okay, na years para mabuhay sa mundo. So, kailangan we make sure okay din yung educational attainment natin and ang ating income is sufficient to meet the basic needs of life in our country. So ano bang minimum ngayon? Almost 15,000 plus, 'di ba? 543 plus. Pero So enough ba yun para ma-sustain yung basic needs? So yun yung tanong na dapat sagutin, okay, natong HDI na to. So how do countries compare on economic development? So as you can see, dito, which is 2008, ayan, sa book natin, 13,811. Siyempre, United States pa rin naman ang nangunguna kasi sila naman talaga yung top producer, okay, ng innovation dito sa world. So how does political economy influence economic progress? So like I said in my first discussion, chapter 1, which is technology, we need, okay, progress if meron tayong innovation and entrepreneurship. So these two are the best engines of a long-run economic growth. Hindi lang sa economy tayo mga tao. Kailangan we should have innovate or meron tayong mindset na innovators tayo and at the same time entrepreneurship tayo. So wag lang tayong gastos ng gastos, guys, okay? So if ever yung ibig sabihin ng innovation, may something ka, may resources ka at ang gagawin mo is to innovate it. Gawin mo siyang mas effective for yourself. So, eto, meron din tayong tinatawag na entrepreneurship, which is good na tinuturuan natin yung bawat isa na maging business-minded. Ayan, so, ano ba yung pagiging business-minded? Kailangan ba magbenta ka agad? Hindi. So, ang pagiging entrepreneur din, kailangan, syempre, yung knowledge na pumapasok sa'yo is magagamit mo sa real life scenario. So, nako-congratulate ko na kayo kasi yan, accounting kayo, 'di ba? So lahat yan, yung mga pagda-debit credit nyo is magagamit nyo yan in the future, 5 to 10 years from now. And at the same time, ayan, meron tayong tinatawag na mga business na pwede natin din magamit. So if may mga innovations kayo, or nagsa-start kayo mag-business ngayong pandemic, okay lang din yan. So, ito talaga yung kailangan for our economic. Kasi sa innovation, dito nagiging efficient yung process. At sa entrepreneurship naman, dito nagkakaroon ng income. So, income ang kailangan ng ating economy for long-run economic growth. And we have also democratic regimes that are probably more conducive to long-term economic growth than dictatorships, even the benevolent kind. So, dito, sabi nila, anti-Western book kasi ang gamit natin. Siyempre, mas advantage sa kanila na gumamit ng democratic ideology rather than dictatorship. So, subsequent economic growth leads to the establishment of democratic regimes. So how do geography and education influence economic development? So yan, like I said on my first chapter, education is really important also to influence economic development. So sabi dito, countries with favorable geography are more likely to engage in trade and so be more open to market-based economic system and the economic growth they promote. Siyempre kasi if the geography is good, 'di ba? At open yung market base nila, syempre mas okay na mag-trade doon. Ibig sabihin ng trade, magbenta ng mga products and service, import, export. Okay? So countries that invest in education have higher growth rates because the workforce is more productive. Syempre, ang pagiging productive, nakukuha rin yan sa pagiging edukado or edukada. Kasi if you have more knowledge, you can have more skills and at the same time, you can absorb more work. 'Di ba? So, pag nag-absorb ka ng more work, mas okay din yung iyong productivity kasi mas marami kang nagagawa. So, hindi rin naman kasi natin pwedeng i-hire yung mga uneducated people. 'Di ba? Kasi mag-i-invest pa tayo nun sa education. So, importante din na yung continuous education, yung mga trainings, ayan, pwede natin yung magamit 5 to 10 years from now. Kaya, like me, kahit nag-work ako, ayun, I never stop learning. Okay? Na kahit busy, ayan, kailangan pa rin talaga natin ng continuous education. I attend seminars, trainings, and certifications left and right so that I can be more productive sa mga darating na taon. So yan. So how is the political economy changing? So since the late 1980s, two trends have emerged. So number one is democratic revolution. So it is from late 1980s to late early 1990s. So dito, binabalikan lang ng history kung ano yung contribution ng democratic revolution sa economic progress. Sabi dito, nung nagkaroon ng democratic revolution, mas naging open yung mga country for new information and communication technologies. And there has been economic advances on the last 25 years that have led increasingly prosperous middle and working classes who have pushed for democratic reforms. So, number two, we have also a move away from centrally planned and mixed economies. So more countries have shifted toward the market-based model. So in the Philippines, I think nandito na tayo sa market-based models. Kasi ito talaga yung ideal. It is based on the economical theory, which is kailangan masunod talaga yung supply and demand. Yan. So how free are countries politically? So ito, yung green color, it means free. Orange is partially free and blue is not free. So yan, ano kaya tong blue na to? So somewhere in Asia, ayan, China, 'di ba? Hindi sila free. So here naman sa table na to, ayan, distribution yan ng economic freedom. So the shift toward a market-based system involves number one, deregulation. So it removes the legal restrictions to the free play of markets, establishment of private enterprise, and the manner in which private enterprises operate. And we have also privatization, which transfers the ownership of state property into the hands of private investors. So, yan. Kung gusto natin ng market-based system, kung gusto nyo malaman yung characteristic ng isang market-based system, kailangan may deregulation and privatization. So, it is also inclined to the creation of a legal system to safeguard the property rights. So what does the changing economy mean for managers? So one, markets that were formerly off limits to Western business are now open. Ayan. Ibig sabihin ng changing economy, okay, may pagbabago sa globalization natin para sa mga managers. And then, identifying and investing early potential future economic stars, firmly may be able to gain first mover advantage. So, alam niyo naman tong stars, di ba? Kasali to sa financial analysis. So, meron tayong tinatawag na cash cow, meron tayong tinatawag na stars, meron tinatawag na dog. Ayan. So, pag sinabi kasing stars, ito yung mga developing countries pa lang. So, dapat ma-identify natin yun para doon tayo nag-invest. So, okay lang din naman mag-invest sa mga cash cows, yung mga talagang nasa tuktok na, pero mabagal kasi yung ano niya, yung growth. Kasi nasa tuktok na siya eh. So, kailangan mag-i-invest tayo dito sa potential future stars. Ibig sabihin, mababa pa lang siya, okay, yung value niya, pero may pag-asa talaga siyang maging cash cow in the future. Ibig sabihin, makagain tayo ng sobrang laking pera doon. So, ito, yung mga first mover advantage, ito yung talagang nagbe-benefit. Ibig sabihin ng first mover, nauna ka, 'di ba? Ikaw yung analyzed na itong economy na to is future star. So ngayon daw, ang Philippines daw is part of the future economic stars. So if you agree or not, ayan, based sa mga financial analyst or gurus, ang Philippines is one of the future economic stars. Kaya maraming nag-invest sa atin this 21st century. So, and we need to establish loyalty and experience in the country. Example, in China, there are 1.2 billion people, and in India, there are 1.1 billion people also. So, however, the potential risks are large. So, syempre, nag-invest ka nga, 'di ba, sa future stars. So, kahit naman saan, kapag nag-invest ka, it's risky. It does not guarantee, but you need to have your own research. And it can be more costly to do business in countries which dramatically different product, workplace, pollution standards, or where there is poor or legal protection for property rights. Ito yung um, mga nagbi-business, okay, na globally talaga, like risky siya, pero kailangan mo siyang i-assess ng mabuti kasi may tinatawag tayong workplace differences, 'di ba? Pollution standard, and we have also tackling about legal protection for property rights as well. So, what does the changing economy mean for manager? So, ito yung mga risks na dapat i-consider ng isang manager. So, kung magiging manager kayo in the future, guys, ayan. Number 1 is political risk. So, as I mentioned, di ba? It is likelihood that political forces will cause drastic changes in country's business environment that adversely affects the profit and other goals of a business enterprise. Kaya nga kapag nakikita nyo, whenever there is a new president or election, nagbabago drastically yung prices ng stocks. That is because of a political risk. Second, it is due also for, because of economic risk. So the likelihood that the economy mismanagement will cause drastic changes in country's business environment that adversely affects the profit and other goals of a business enterprise. Now, okay, this 2020, naglabas yung mga bank ng mga regulatory guidelines, 'di ba? Napabawasan nila yung interest. So, from 0.0625% naging 0.0125% na lang. So, bakit nag-drastic change? Naging half, wala na nga tayong interest. 0.0625 na lang, magiging 0.0125 pa. So, it is because, okay, yung nangyayari sa atin na pandemic or crisis. Example, yung globe, naglabas, diba? Magkakaroon na ng charges sa iba't ibang pag nag-transfer ka ng money. So, nakaka-affect din talaga yung business environment, okay, sa economy. So, ibig sabihin kasi, yung economy natin talagang bumagsak ng pandemic. So, pa-boom pa lang siya. So, ang importante dito is, kailangan magkaroon pa rin ng profit yung mga business enterprise. 'Di ba? Kasi sila yung nagsasuffer if may economic risk. And then, ang effect nun sa ating mga customers or consumers. So, legal risk, okay, it is a likelihood that a trading partner will opportunistically break a contract or expropriate property rights. So, maraming ngayong pandemic, no, maraming mga bilang nawawalan ng trabaho, ayan, so for example, regular ka na, pero hindi may iwasan yung mga pag-i-end ng contract kasi wala na talaga eh. Okay? So if if bumagsak yung economy, yung mga risk na to, ayan, kailangan maging prepared ka. So how can managers determine a market overall attractiveness? So here, we should always see a country as a potential market and an investment site for an international business. So it depends on our benefits, cost, risk associated with doing business in that country. And other things being equal, the benefit cost risk trade-off is most likely to be most favorable in politically stable developed. So nagbigay naman siya ng hint. So, kailangan mag-invest ka daw sa mga politically stable developed nations. Kasi, mas mababa yung risk doon dahil hindi sila masyadong naaapektuhan ng inflation rates and private sector debt. So, review question, guys. So, etong